Staying in Contact. I'm London Mitchell. Each week, we take a few minutes to talk about our corner of Northwest Ohio, often examining issues in the community and introducing you to individuals working to address those issues. Every now and again, we take time to talk to local authors, many of them delving into the history of the Toledo area. And that's what we're doing in this installment. We are in contact with Doug Tracy. His book, Times, Crimes, and the Tenderloin in Pre-Prohibition Toledo. I started my chat with Doug asking him about the motivation to write about, what would you call it, Toledo's more steamy past?
Could be. Yeah, it's all perception. I actually this whole journey started about 17 years ago. I had to look up the dates. I had no intentions whatsoever of writing a book or anything like this. I was working on a website. I had just retired and I was working on a passion of mine, local music history. And I was working on a website called columbusmusichistory.com, and I was looking for ideas and basically just design ideas, color schemes, arrangements on the screen, that kind of thing. And I got an offer from ancestry.com. I think it came through email in the early days, and it was asking or offering, I think, a 10-day or maybe a 2-week free trial. And I thought, well, I'll sign up. But I wasn't looking for ancestors. I was just looking for design ideas. So I logged in and got on the ancestry.com, and I entered the name of my grandfather. That's the oldest relative I ever knew about. We didn't know anything about ancestry in our family. And so when I typed in his name, the first thing that popped up was a census that showed an early census that showed his father, his name was Lewis B. Tracy, was a Toledo detective. And that right away caught my attention. I stopped looking for designs and I started wondering, who is this guy? Because I'd never heard of him before. And so I scrolled down a little bit further, and there was a newspaper article that popped up. I think it was the Lima Times. It was from, I think, 1915. That said Detective Tracy had been indicted by a grand jury for taking protection money from Tenderloin brothel madams. And once I saw that, then it was down the rabbit hole. And I was just following my curiosity. I wasn't really trying to accomplish anything in particular, but I kept discovering, it was one discovery after another. And it was just astonishing stuff that I never knew about. And it quickly ceased being about family ancestry, and it was more about just the stories of the people that he ran into, the things that happened to him. He was in 1915. He was literally put in charge of the Tenderloin in Toledo, and of course, I needed to know, well, what's the Tenderloin? You know, it's the red light district, and where was it, and who were these characters, and pretty soon after that, I got started. My father called me and said, your Aunt Fran has something you might be interested in. And Aunt Fran was his sister who who grew up in Toledo. And she was in a senior citizens home at the time. And so I picked up my parents. They lived on the far east side of Cleveland, and took them to Toledo to visit Aunt Fran. And when I was sitting with Aunt Fran in her little senior citizens apartment, she handed me this shopping bag, and it was full of. I looked at it, and it was full of a bunch of old photos, old documents. But the things that the two things that caught my attention right away were 2 scrapbooks, very, very old, crumbling scrapbooks. And it turned out those 2 scrapbooks were the scrapbooks of Detective Lewis B. Tracy, and it pretty much chronicled his entire career. And so I begged her and pleaded, and I said, can you let me take these? And I promise I'll bring them back. And my intention was to carefully scan everything in the scrapbooks. And I ended up transcribing all of the articles and most of the documents. And I did return them to her. But that's what got me started. And then I just started following. I could pick out almost any article about a crime or something that happened in the Tenderloin from the scrapbook, and follow that and expand it by finding out who was the criminal, what happened to him, what was the crime, those kinds of things. And I was just doing that for years and years. And then I spent I've spent tons of time in Toledo, so many trips I can't even count them, and I've met so many just kind and generous and helpful people in Toledo, that kind of pointed me the way to the Toledo Firefighters Museum, to the Toledo Police Museum, to the Toledo History Museum. Just so many good people, and they helped me expand the story. And I began hearing a couple of years ago, you need to write a book. So I basically compiled a lot of these stories, and it became a book. I thought it was a good idea. Let's do a book. So that's pretty much how it came about. Just astonishing material. And I was also, it was kind of interesting to discover that a lot of this Tenderloin stuff, people in Toledo, even people at the Toledo Police Museum, um, just really weren't up on that. People didn't know what the Tenderloin was or where it was. So that kind of inspired me too to keep moving forward with this book, because I think it's a lot of these stories, as I understand that, are stories that are fairly new to Toledo historians.
Well, let's
Um,
talk about that Tenderloin district. A lot of people don't realize that back shortly after the turn of the century, we still had prostitution that was legal in Toledo, and police squads or police units that were actually assigned to this area.
yeah, I was stunned. One of my real close friends now, Officer Beth Thiemann, she helped me a lot at the Toledo Police Museum, and she found from the personnel records of Detective Tracy, she actually found the sheet that outlines his assignment as head of the Tenderloin. And the Tenderloin was, the boundaries were, they were fuzzy because it's not a geographic area per se, but generally it was Monroe Street on the north, Summit on the east, Michigan Avenue on the west, and the old Swan Creek before it got rerouted to the south. And his assignment, it was just stunning to me. His assignment was to register they called them streetwalkers, register all of the prostitutes and streetwalkers and brothel madams and so forth, get their addresses, all of their personal information. He had to photograph them, and they had to have a health checkup every week because venereal disease was rampant, of course, and they had to carry around a health certificate certifying that they were free and clear. And this was all in the era around 1915, and it was all along Lafayette Street in. I always tell people, just for reference, that if you know where the Spaghetti Warehouse is in Toledo, that's pretty much the heart of the Tenderloin along Lafayette. That's where most of the not just brothels, but there were gambling halls, there were pool halls, there were what they called policy shops, which were actually numbers places basically, or storefronts. They were all right there, and saloons, of course, everywhere. Toledo, I was again, so many surprises. I was I was surprised to read in a newspaper article that the number of saloons per person in Toledo, they made Toledo the #1 saloon city in the country, and the nearest, the second place saloon city basically was St. Louis, and St. Louis had half the saloons per person that Toledo did.
Did this surprise you? I mean, to me, hearing you say that, I knew there was a Tenderloin district in Toledo, but I had no idea that we ranked #1 in saloons.
Yeah, there were so many surprises, and I mean, hearing myself talk about it, it's just still it's still kind of stunning to me. But most big cities did have red light districts of some sort. Toledo's the one thing that really kind of confused me at first was that the newspapers referred to Toledo's red light district as the segregated district. And that kind of threw me a little bit at first until I realized what segregated meant was it had nothing to do with race. It was simply they wanted to concentrate all of the vices in one geographical area to make it easier to police, basically, and easier to control, and probably more importantly, keep it from spilling over into the more respectable neighborhoods.
Doug Tracy is the author of Times, Crimes, and the Tenderloin in Pre-Prohibition Toledo, all based on the historical records of his great-grandfather, a Toledo police detective. I'm London Mitchell. And I suppose if there's anything that we can draw from our conversation, Doug, is that every family has a story. And the surprise is when you find out what that story is. And yours was definitely rooted in Detective Tracy.
It was, and he, I'm glad to hear you say that because I use almost that same phrase all the time that every family has stories, every family. And in this case, the family story, of course, is fascinating to me, but it's really bigger than just a family story. I look at Detective Tracy really as being sort of my guide to all these other stories. He's not central to all the stories. He may have had a hand in some of the investigations or whatever, but really, I mean, in terms of time travel here, he's really just kind of my guide to all these other incredible stories. One of the stories, if we have time,
Sure.
it's kind of a side story that really surprised me was his his wife was her ancestor, her family were Irish, and there were 13 in that family that came to Toledo in the beginning, during the Great Famine in 1849. They arrived in Toledo, and they have a great story. A number of that family ended up fighting in the Civil War shortly after they arrived here. But the one story that really just leaped out at me was Captain James Frazier, and they called him Captain Jim. He was a firefighter, and he died in the Great Fire of 1894, right along the riverfront, right downtown where Promenade Park is now. There were two large grain elevators there, and they caught fire, and the firemen actually gave up the fire. They didn't think they could control it. It was leaping from building to building toward the center of the city. But Captain Jim died in that fire. He and his partner were in one of the buildings, which is again right on the side of Promenade Park, and the room exploded. Captain Jim was last seen wandering into the smoke, dazed, and his partner somehow miraculously escaped. So he could tell the story of Captain Jim's last moments and where he actually fell. And all these years later, and again, this was 1894, all these years later, they never found Captain Jim's remains. And they're still beneath the soil in Promenade Park. So to shorten the story, I ended up working with the people at the Firefighters Museum and the fire department, and we ended up with a historical marker, which is right in front of ProMedica's headquarters. They were kind enough to designate a space when they built their headquarters for the historical marker. And I am forever grateful for them for doing that. So there's a marker right there, and the remains of a firefighter underground right there in Promenade Park, in the center of everything. Really, really interesting story.
I think so. I think so. I'm going to look for it next time we're downtown and walking around the Promenade Park
Yeah,
area. Doug Tracy, thank you for
yeah. The
chatting with us.
firefighters really care about those things. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah. No, I want to thank you for chatting, and I'm enjoying the book, and I
Well,
appreciate
I'm glad to
the
hear that.
time, and I think it's well written, and I really enjoy it. The name of the book is Times, Crimes, and the Tenderloin in Pre-Prohibition Toledo. You can find it on Amazon. I want to thank author Doug Tracy for chatting with us some interesting tidbits about Toledo's steamier history. I'm London Mitchell, hoping you'll accept this invitation to join us again next week as we continue staying in contact. And I love to get your emails. Contact me through my website, londonmitchell.news, or follow me on Blue Sky.
Previous installments of Staying in Contact with London Mitchell are available on Amazon Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, Podchaser, the Stream 419 app, and londonmitchell.news.